Experience a membership that backs what you're building with American Express Business Platinum. Get 2 times membership rewards points per dollar on eligible purchases in key business categories, as well as on each eligible purchase of $5,000 or more, on up to $2 million in eligible purchases per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
We find Vecna, we end this once and for all, together.
On December 25th.
We have a plan. It's a bit insane. Everyone in?
He knows where we are.
Watch out!
Get ready for one last adventure.
We stay true to ourselves. Stay true to our friends, no matter the cost.
Found you. Stranger Things, Season 5, Volume 2, begins December 25th. Only on Netflix.
Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is the accidental radical Karen Dobres. Until her 50s, Karen's life had taken a path familiar to so many women who were born in the 60s, 70s and 80s. From modelling in her early 20s, she trained as a counsellor and worked at that alongside bringing up a family. So far, so familiar. Then, as she puts it, she had her final period, attended her first football match, and everything changed. Now, like me, Karen grew up in the 70s when girls weren't allowed to play football at school, although the law had changed to technically allow us to play in 1971. And she had less than no interest in football until she discovered women's football. She became a passionate supporter and then director of Lewes FC, which was famed for being the first team to pay its male and female players the same.
I thought, well, what's it like to watch women play football? It never occurred to me. And I went to watch a women's match at Lewes. It wasn't what I thought a football match was at all. It was, the word is overused, but it was empowering. I saw these young women aged between the ages of 18 and 30, just not caring what they looked like. These were women who had agency and in a public place.
Karen's 5 years on the board there are the subject of her new book, Pitch Invasion. Karen joined me to talk about what it takes to be a feminist on a football club board and her part in helping to turn the pitch into a place that not just welcomes women, but encourages them. The benefits of being an outsider, why manspreading starts in the playground, how menopause gave her permission to get angry, the importance of celebrating what our bodies can do, not what they look like, why football is helping to put a little prick in the Trump balloon, and why she needed to create a town called Fuckery. Well, thank you, Karen, so much for coming on The Shift. I'm really excited to talk to you. I thought I knew a lot about football, because I do understand the offside rule and I was brought up in a football household. So I thought, okay, there's nothing she's going to be able to teach me here. How wrong was I? How wrong?
Oh, really? Did you? So what did you learn? Tell me.
I think it's what struck me the most. It's kind of what you were saying about how you were an outsider because you weren't into football. How much I'm not an outsider, but I'm not an insider either, but how much I kind of took for granted. And right, I didn't, because I grew up, I think we're vaguely the same age. I think I'm probably a little bit older than you. But we both grew up in that same sort of time, didn't we? The kind of the 70s, the kind of page 3, dads were dads and mums were mums.
Yeah. And boys played football, but girls didn't.
No. And it was annoying, but you just didn't question it, did you?
You just thought it was normal, really, didn't we? We just sort of resigned ourselves to netball or hopscotch around the margins of the playground.
Yes.
What I call early manspreading from the boys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know what? That is so true. I hadn't thought about that, the way they dominated the playground.
Yeah, their space and their voices quite often.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that at all, because I was thinking about the fact that I would have liked to have played football. I hated netball. Now, before loads of people message me saying, I love netball, netball's great. I'm sure you do. I was no good at it. I can't throw to save my life. And I was always relegated to what's the worst position, kind of wing defence. You weren't trusted to be a goalkeeper or a goal shooter, quite rightly. But you didn't get like a really good runny position either. So I was relegated to the worst position. Anyway, I hated netball and I would have loved to play football, but it just didn't occur to me that I could.
No, well, that's probably because culturally it was only men and boys when we were growing up. I'm not sure how old you are. I'm 58.
Oh, yeah,
soon.
well, I'm 59. So we are
yeah,
more or less
sort of
the same.
Yeah, and women were only unbanned from playing officially in 1971. And when they were unbanned, the FA didn't put any extra resource behind women and girls playing football. So, you know, everybody thought that football was a men's game. And they always would talk about, 1966 and all that.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but really it was just like what you saw on the telly were men's Premier League matches. And what you saw on the back of newspapers were men. And then even on the front of newspapers, you might see male players in jacuzzis, or you might see hooligans that were men rampaging around Europe. The only place for women was WAGs, wasn't it?
And that was a bit later, wasn't it, as well?
It was a bit later, but I mean, I never did like football. I never thought it was, something for me. And those are the kind of reasons why.
Yeah.
Culturally.
So tell me a bit about little Karen. What was little Karen like? What was it like growing up?
I was quite studious, really. I loved reading and I loved school. I've got one sister, my mum and dad, and none of us were into football, but we had a much wider family as well. Like my mum's one of 11. So we have loads of cousins round all the time. I was a good girl, in inverted commas. Yeah, I just really enjoyed reading and books and, not really sport. I liked swimming. That's quite a lonely sort of, isn't it, activity? But I loved that. I liked dancing actually as well, and music. Grew up in northwest London, very near Wembley actually, so that if I was using the tube when I was a teenager, I might have to get off if there were loads of football fans coming back or going to Wembley, because I would feel a bit threatened or harassed, by them. Growing up, I didn't have many experiences of football apart from a sort of fairly negative association, and also I just thought it was a bit boring.
But very much a boy thing. And like you say, if your only association of it is having to get off the tube to avoid the fans because they're a bit scary and leery.
Exactly. My cousin, Gary, played for Brentford FC. And when I was 14, I went to a match. He was a striker. In fact, he's in their Hall of Fame and everything. And I went there with another cousin, Judy, just, sort of my age. It was a really horrible environment. Like, it was all these men with beers and sort of shouting. And we were two teenage girls. They kind of looked at us funny. And I don't know, it didn't feel welcoming at all. I couldn't wait to go, So I had that experience.
Yeah. And was your dad, was it a football house? Because, my dad was massively into football.
Yeah, no, so it wasn't. It wasn't at all. No, my dad was sort of, if anything, a bit anti-football because he didn't like the hooliganism side of it that had been going on. And I remember him going to the betting shop and betting on whoever was playing England, like for them to win. Yeah, deliberately and things like this. So yeah, he was a little bit anti it, but not, it didn't really figure.
Yeah. So how did you get then from a kind of disinterested, actually a bit negative attitude to football to a director of a football club? Because that's a huge amount of years, but also that's a massive leap as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it is funny, isn't it? I like my friends were literally dying of laughter when I told them I was going to be a football club director. Basically, because like what we were saying earlier, Sam, and I was talking about boys playing football in the playground and it being like early manspreading. I see football as a microcosm of patriarchy, really, and of society, the wider society. And when my local football club, Lewes FC, were going to pay the women the same as the men, and it was going to be the first club in the world to do that, I woke up to it. I thought, what? You mean women play football to a semi-pro or even, as we know, pro level. And B, they're not paid the same as men for doing it. And not only are they not paid, the more I found out, the more I realized that, they were completely marginalized and got crumbs from the men's table. I became interested. I thought, well, what's it like to watch women play football? It never occurred to me. And I went to watch a women's match at Lewes. It wasn't what I thought a football match was at all. In fact, to me, the word is overused, but it was empowering. I saw these young women aged between the ages of 18 and 30, just not caring what they looked like or whether they were behaving well or not, that kind of thing, but really shouting, taking up space, going for the ball, playing in a team, really focused on what they were doing. These weren't ornaments. These were women who had agency and in a public place where anyone could go and watch them for entertainment, right? So I just thought this was amazing. It made me feel better about myself, but also at that point, my daughter was 17 and her friends were 17. And I was really worried that feminism had gone backwards. And I just thought, this is the answer. Come and watch a women's football match. It's totally different than watching men play or what I had imagined, big matches at men's stadia were like. So that there were, when Lewes FC introduced this sort of equal pay, equal resourcing, there were critics who said the women don't deserve to be paid the same as the men. They don't get the same crowds. But using myself as an example of someone who hadn't even known there were women playing football, how on earth are you going to get the same crowds when men have had this monopoly over football for years and everybody thinks that going to a football match is watching men? And they don't know this opportunity exists. So I volunteered to go and tell other women like myself who didn't like football, in inverted commas, about what Lewes were doing and asked them to come in solidarity with the cause for gender equality rather than because they thought they were going to love the football, and then see if they liked it. And so I volunteered to do that. I did that. And lots of things happened along the way.
Lots of things. I mean, before we get into that a bit more, I want to talk about your kind of personal, I hate the word journey. It's like empowering. It's like there's this whole list of words that you'd ideally not use anymore, isn't there?
I know.
I can't think of anything else. Your path, maybe. Because you were a model, weren't you?
Yes.
And then I trained as to be a counsellor. And it struck me when I was reading that with the best will in the world, models are clothes hangers. You're kind of, as you say in the book, you're there to be objectified effectively, or to not get in the way of the clothes, one or the other, depending on which sort of model you are. And then counselling is the opposite of that. Sorry, my cat has made an entrance. Do you know what? To interrupt myself, I haven't been, anybody listening will know this saga, but I haven't been able to record in my study for nearly a year because of a flood that I won't go into. It's gross, too much information. And in the time I've been recording elsewhere, the cat hasn't made his presence felt at all. This is the first time I'm back in my study for all that time. And he's back. He's back with his claws climbing up my back.
He knew you were about to talk about catwalks,
yeah, he did.
Didn't he? Came right in there.
What I was asking basically is how you became a model, which is very much one thing. Then you became a counsellor, which feels like it's very much another thing. And then you're confronted with all these women on a pitch. You have a completely different attitude to their bodies. And I'm interested in that circuit, if you like, and how all those things come together.
Yeah, no, it's true, isn't it? I mean, we'll go back a bit. When I was at university, I was editing a free magazine for students. I was studying English and I always wanted to be a journalist, actually, a writer. When I left university, I hadn't done anything at all about having a career. And I'd been scouted while I was there doing a student fashion show for students at what was then the Poly. They were doing design. I went to the agents, not, needing to actually pay rent, and start living on my own. I went to the agency and they sort of did some what are called test shots with me, which is when an agency sends you out to see how you would be in front of the camera. And then if they like them, they can send them to potential clients and see if you can get some work. And they liked them. But then I went off to Florida, actually, with my then boyfriend. did some amazing things down there for 6 months or so, actually going through the mangroves in Key West and being a tour guide for them just whenever the guy that managed it had German tourists, because I could speak German. But anyway, when I got back, that agency, which was elite agency, they said, oh no, we've got someone that looks like you now. So I went to another agency and got taken on, literally for needing some money, needing to earn money, and this being apparently the easiest way available to me at that point. And sure enough, that worked quite well. And I started to work as a model, and it was not something I had intended to particularly take seriously, actually. I sometimes wish I had, actually, because it was an amazing experience that I took a little bit for granted at the time, I think. But I loved it. I was walking shows. I got some commercial work. I was doing a lot of hair work, and it was enough to pay rent. And then, then I did get, I forgot this, but I went to the Essex Chronicle, but I could only get a job selling newspapers and not writing for them. Whilst there, bear with me, a friend took his own life. And I contacted the Samaritans because I didn't know what you did in those circumstances. I wanted to talk to someone. I'd just moved to Chelmsford in Essex, and I didn't know how to deal with the grief, really, and the shock. And then I ended up volunteering for Samaritans because I really appreciated and loved what they'd done for me. I began sort of being on the phones 3 nights a week, and it was so much more interesting than my day job. I just loved it. So I thought I'll go back to London and train to be a counsellor. So once again, went back to modelling, same agency, to pay for the counselling course. And the counselling course was expensive. It was really good though. And I was very young to be doing it. Most people there were my age now, a bit younger. In terms of your question, I was doing roles then that were very much associated with the traditional feminine, like looking pretty or healing others, looking after others, nurturing, those kind of roles, which felt very, easy to slip into to some extent as a woman. And they felt like I would somehow get brownie points from society for doing them. Football, I think, that came some years later. In fact, I had my menopause, I had my last period when I was 51, and I went to my first match when I was 49. I think I was perimenopausal going into menopause, and I was changing a lot, or had already changed, but it hadn't sort of quite come out yet. Menopause gave me permission to be much more, angry, really. I think counselling and therapy over the years had given me that permission. Like being angry got rid of my headaches, and having permission to be like really, really angry, really just miraculously got rid of them in therapy. And I do often find that I get symptoms, bodily symptoms that are associated with emotions in some way. So menopause was a kind of like, massive, big sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, like permission-giving counsellor that says, go for it, take that tennis racket and bash it into that cushion in the middle of the floor and get those symptoms out. And I think being on a football club board at that point was the perfect place, to really wind me up and trigger me enough to really release action. Took a lot of action in those years.
This episode of The Shift is sponsored by Shopify. It's that time of year again, I know. And let's face it, it can be really overwhelming. So the sooner you get things done, the better. And there's no better time to get a good deal, whether you're a shopper or a business, than Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. Whether you're an established business or a startup, the most important thing you need is a platform that can handle everything that's heading your way. Out of stock just as orders pour in? Or a site that can't keep up with demand? Make sure your platform is ready for anything and everything that comes your way during the busiest weekend of the year with Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Heinz to entrepreneurs like Skims and Allbirds, to startups who will be experiencing their first Black Friday Cyber Monday this year. Don't have time to spend hours poring over every little detail? Who does? Shopify has thousands of templates and tools to help streamline website creation, making sure your site isn't just aesthetically pleasing, but functional too. And you can stress less, knowing that Shopify's award-winning customer support team is on standby 24/7 to help get you back to business as fast as possible. If you want to give customers the best experience possible this holiday season, you need Shopify. This Black Friday, join the thousands of new entrepreneurs hearing, for the first time with Shopify. Sign up for your free trial today at shopify.co.uk/shift. That's shopify.co.uk/shift. Go to shopify.co.uk/shift and make this Black Friday one to remember. What made you join the board? Because it might be useful for people listening. Just a very, very brief little history of Lewes Football Club, because it seems to me it's almost like a perfect storm of circumstance there that allowed it to happen, that allowed what was, what you write about and what was known at the time as Equality FC, that allowed that to happen. Because that, I don't know, could that have happened at Manchester United? I'm inclined to think that the forces, the financial power forces at a great big club with a lot of money would have meant that it couldn't happen.
Exactly, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. It was a perfect storm, and it's unusual, which is why, really I wrote the book, because I don't think, I think it was a really kind of squiggly and what if moment of sliding doors, really. Lewes FC is a small club. We're near Brighton in Sussex. In 2009, it was experiencing, the effects of the economy, really. There was financial ruin was on the cards. And my husband, who has always been a massive football fan, had, when we moved to Lewes, just a couple of years before that, had immediately started to go to matches and was concerned about the club. He and 5 other fans bought the club for £1, a nominal £1, paid off all its debts, then mutualised it. And what that means is that you make it community owned rather than a private shareholder owning it, or private ownership in any way. And so anybody in the world could buy 1 share of Lewes FC for £30. It's now £50. You can still do it. Get voting rights as to who should be on the board, and also stand for election themselves. The club is a community benefit society, and it's there to create benefit for the community that it serves. Also the football community, to be fair, the community of interest. That was Lewes FC. And I'd actually become an owner, in 2009 when they did this, because I liked the sort of social ownership model. I thought that was really great. I never intended to go to a football match. That was his thing, But then when they introduced equal pay or equal playing budgets in 2017, and Charlie actually said to me, what would you say if we paid the women the same as the men? And I was gobsmacked. I said, I didn't know there were women playing down there. The way I got involved was they had a couple of women on the board at that point, but they were both, neither of them were communicators. They were both very heavily involved in football or operations, facilities. Neither of them were going to go and tell other women about this equality thing. It didn't feel right that men should be going to tell women about equality and then ask them to come to support. And also, I think with my experience of never liking football, I could relate to these, what I called unwelcome women, who didn't know they were unwelcome. They just thought that they didn't want to know about football. They didn't realise that they'd been actively banned or excluded by the powers that be. After a couple of seasons, when the work was going really well, like we quadrupled our women's gate in a couple of seasons, and the men's gate rose too, and we were getting like international headlines. It was crazy, the amount of interest there was, and sponsors starting to come on board and more owners. So I was co-opted onto the board initially, and then I stood for election a couple of months later and got elected onto the board. That was your perfect storm.
Yeah, tell me about, there were several little nuggets in the book that leapt out of me that I've scribbled down. But one of the things that struck me as applying to the entire world and the situations that women increasingly find themselves in, whatever they're doing, whoever they're doing it with, was about seeing the water we're all swimming in. Now, can you explain that?
Yes, I can. So in 2017, women's football was not as popular as it is now, which is largely thanks to the Lionesses, but also I think thanks to clubs like Lewes. We took for normal, or what I call the wallpaper that's all around us that we know is there, but we don't see it because it's there all the time, is extreme sexism. You would find that out of the BBC would say something like, all the action from the weekend and then not report on one single women's match. You'd have women paying to play, even, at top level football, they'd be paid a minuscule amount, and that would be normal. Or you'd get women at clubs everywhere being relegated to sort of inferior pitches. So they wouldn't play on the same pitch as the men. Fans, if they had any fans, would be travelling out of town to go and try and support them, when the natural fans for that women's team would be the townsfolk. So it doesn't make sense in any way to put them way away from where those people can get to. Also, women's matches weren't advertised or marketed. So, just players themselves thought it was normal. Like women players themselves would, they'd grown up probably as little girls having to play with boys, being grateful to play with boys, and then having to travel a long, long way to find a women's team to play with. Whereas, a little boy would have a choice of 6 or 7 around them. Players had been conditioned really to accept, minuscule amounts, and directors on the board would be always talking about the men's team, and the women's team would be an afterthought, if at all. So all these things were normal within football. And when we talk about the water, this was an anecdote that one of Ed Ramsden gave in his election address, because you always have to give an election address if you want to get elected, and said that this is, there's the 2 fish swimming along, 2 little fish, and an older fish swims in the other direction and says, "Isn't the water great today?" And they kind of smile, and then they're carrying on, and then one of them says to the other, "What water?" Because they don't know they're swimming. They don't know they're swimming in water because they're fish, right? It's just normal. And so Lewes saying, we're going to multiply the women's budget by 10 to make it level with the men's, is so radical. And it was so radical then as well that I can't even explain it. At Lewes, we were proud to be aiming for targets that other clubs couldn't even see because it was water.
Yeah, I remember the headlines at the time. It completely did put you on the map, didn't it? But did you feel like, what about all the people who couldn't see the water and didn't want to?
Well, there were plenty of them, and there still are, to be honest with you, Sam. We were quite careful at the beginning, like the video that we used to introduce what was called Equality FC, the campaign to introduce equal pay, was appealing to men specifically and trying to get them on board via their relationship with their daughters. So we said we had this young girls team on the dripping pan, that's our pitch, sweating and making all this effort and really enjoying themselves and celebrating when they scored a goal. And then a man walking across the pitch saying, "How do you tell your daughter she's worth less than your son?"
Yeah.
Do you want to have that conversation with your daughter? It's going to be an awkward one for you both. Now, this hit home in Lewes very much because they are all owners of this club. They have some say in it. So it's partly their responsibility if the club aren't valuing the women the same as the men. A lot of men, fair-minded men, and lots of women loved it, absolutely brilliant. But there were mostly male fans who disagreed with the concept for various reasons. The main one was, it's market forces. You don't get the same crowd. So, they can't demand the same recompense.
But you did more or less get the same crowd at Lewes, didn't you? Maybe you don't.
Yeah.
At Manchester United, I don't know what a normal. Can you say off the top of your head what a women's Chelsea, say the Chelsea or Manchester United women's team, what would their average crowd be?
Oh God, you're putting me on the spot a bit, but it would be a percentage.
So would it be like 20,000 or something?
20,000,
and the men's
be,
like 70. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I think it might be a bit more and a bit less, but yeah, something like that. It's a much smaller percentage, but then you have to think of 2 things. I was going to say you have to think of like how, the disadvantage that women's football is at developmentally, marketing, culturally and everything. But sometimes I don't even want to think about that. I want to think that it's just not right.
Yeah. I'm not saying they've got a solid argument. I'm just trying to get it because at Lewes, that your gates were more or less the same for men and women.
after a couple of seasons, yes, we more or less aligned, and the ticket prices as well, because we gradually increased the women's ticket price to match that of the men. So yeah, we were like a guinea pig in a way for what can happen if you fairly resource women.
If you invest in, because it wasn't just the player budget, was it? It was marketing and everything. Treat them the same.
Absolutely.
You put the same in, you get the same out.
It was that, and it was interesting with us because we've got a quote on a pitchboard that says equality is a rising tide that lifts all boats. And you know, the buzz about Equality FC and the women, and we were leading with the women really in terms of marketing because that was a new product. The men's product was already known and loyal fan base, etc. What happened was that the whole club benefited from that. So we got an amazing state-of-the-art new pitch, you know, from the work done on the women's side with grants that the men benefit from. We raised the men's gate as well. The ownerships increased dramatically all around the world, and obviously both teams benefit from those revenues. Sponsorships. People wanted to be associated with gender equality and football.
You talk in the book a lot about being an outsider. Have you always felt like an outsider, or was that specific to an outsider in football?
I think I have always felt like a bit of an outsider for different reasons in different places. But in football, I think it came to the fore more than it had ever done. You know, I think I felt a bit weird in many ways, you know, for differences about myself. But then I talk to people about that and they say, oh, me too. You know, me too. I've always felt like a bit of an outsider. So I don't know how relevant that is. But certainly in football, I was what I would say was a double imposter. You know, I was a woman on a mainly male board most of the time. And I was a woman who didn't know the cultural tropes of football, so I couldn't have the conversations with the band. I had some banter, but it wasn't based on football, you know, and I couldn't talk for too long about things like divots or Christmas tree formations because I had to ask so many questions. You know, I was at a loss. I was on the back foot a lot of the time. As I say in the book, I feel I brought in so much from my other perspectives that I had. It was just quite draining sometimes and quite triggering to always be that person, who's bringing another perspective and trying to convince people that this will work. And even when it does work, still having them think it was important or valid that you did it, you know. And people, I know, let's mention imposter syndrome because I just didn't have it. I just didn't have it, Sam. I just knew it was a good thing to be an imposter in this industry because it needed to change, you know. And I was really cross about a lot of the more I discovered about football, about the way things operated, unquestioned. So I thought it was a very good thing. And also having that proof of getting those crowds up held me in good stead in myself, you know.
Yeah, because there's a big difference, isn't there, between being an outsider and being an imposter?
Yeah, but I was both. I just didn't have the same, because I feel I was both. That's why I called the book, you know, I wanted to call the book Bitch Invasion.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
I feel like that's what it felt like to most half of the board, you know, that it was like a woman coming in and changing things. But the publishers said, you know, they thought that Amazon wouldn't like that too much and that we should call it Pitch Invasion. But then I got round it with my lucky lipstick being under the P to make a B.
Yeah, you've got it. You've got it over your shoulder, but I'll hold it up. You've got around it really well, actually, because you've got the title you want. It's just not the title that goes on the websites.
And like I got so involved with football that I used to have little rituals, and one of them was applying my lucky lipstick so that we would score if we were ever down. You know, I'm going to say it worked. It didn't work every time, but it worked a lot. So yeah, I mean, I think I was an outsider, and to many, I think I was an imposter to some people. But you know, so what? Because we need them, don't we?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, things that sometimes when you grow up through things, and I think this is like a variation on a conversation that I have a lot with a lot of women, particularly women who are Gen X, who are, grew up when we did. And it was, well, like you, there's a thing you talk about, when men used to jeer at you on the street when you were like a teenager or, 12, 13, 14, and you're just kind of taught, aren't you, that, well, almost it's a compliment. And certainly that you should just put up with it. But it's one of those things, isn't it? The women who come up with all kind of battling all those obstacles all the way through since they were tiny girls on a football pitch that they weren't allowed to be on, or people still thought they weren't allowed to be on in the 70s, only able to get posters of male footballers, all of those things. Did you find that there were other women who didn't see what you saw as well, because they just thought it was just how it was?
Yeah, 100%. It was probably someone amazing like Bell Hooks who said patriarchy doesn't have a gender, you can be male or female and still uphold those values and still be very conditioned and not question it. And I'm like that sometimes, and I know I am. So, I mean, it's not something that I particularly blame those women for, but definitely there were women who, amongst the players, absolutely my role models, really, even though they're a lot younger than me. But they would say, yeah, I used to play for Chelsea, but then the funding was taken away from the women's team, so I looked for another team, and like that was normal. Or, we used to, a sponsor came in and gave us boots, but didn't give it to the women, only to the men. And then I asked if I could pay for some of the boots, and they said, no, it's only for the men. And that's normal. So when I used to talk to players, especially if they used to come and do a talk with me, and they'd tell me that I'd ask them for their stories, of obstacles they'd had to overcome. And they'd tell me stories like this. And I would be so shocked at it that I'd accidentally radicalize them, really. And they'd be like, yeah, you're right. That isn't right. Yeah, I've always thought that, it's wrong. But in order to get along in football, you have to be, if you're going to make a big fuss at a club, you might not get played. You might get benched. You're not the authority here. So you have to go along with it. Same as me getting wolf whistled, in the street and having to take it as a bit of a compliment, because say you question it and get crossed by it, God knows what might happen, right? Also and not just the players, but women who had worked in football and few and far between could be quite accepting of how it was, because they'd managed to get to where they were with those circumstances. So, you just have to try a bit harder. Some people might think, yeah.
Did you feel like, because this happens in all industries where, like, particularly on the board, like there's only room for one. Did you feel like there were people who resented you because you'd come in with a completely different perspective and no, you hadn't done the hard football graft?
There was a sort of a lack of respect sometimes from some people because I hadn't done the hard football graft. And also because, to be fair, a lot of my ideas were very quirky, very creative, and not what you'd normally associate with a football club. But that was the very point. I didn't want to do things that were normally associated with football clubs. I wanted new angles to attract people in and then hopefully, keep them. Like Prosecco on tap, or I got a statue of the bisexual female pirates in there. I started a literary competition. All these things that you just don't normally have at football clubs, because I knew that there were people that would come because of those things, or be interested because of those things, and then stay because of the Prosecco on tap, or because of the women's football chanting workshops, or because it was brilliant to watch. And they hadn't considered watching it before. So I think some of the ideas, when I first put them to senior leadership or the board, were a bit out there. And some of them were very opportunistic, so relied on us acting quickly. And people like to plan, and there's not always time to plan, even consult all of the owners or something like that. So, so I think I was a bit... it was tricky at times.
You're being very diplomatic.
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because people are I understand people, like, they're doing what they think is best. But because if you don't have unity in terms of the way everybody's thinking, you can't move quickly enough to, have your pulse on the culture or your pulse on whatever's happening right now, react to a news story, get your social media quickly going and, things like that. So, yeah, I understand. I just don't agree.
Yeah, exactly. And those two things can be true, can't they? And also there is the board, isn't there? Because there were two women on the board when you joined. And like you say, but they were both had a football background. I want to talk a bit about you leaving, but there were two women joined when you left? But they didn't stay, did they?
No, women generally didn't stay on the board for their whole term. In fact, I'm trying to think of anyone who did during the sort of 7 years or so that I've been associated. Yeah, I don't know another woman who stayed for a 3-year term while I was on the board.
Let alone applying to stand for the next one, which you didn't.
Re-election.
That's it, re-election, that's the word, menopause. I mean, that's something that we see all through society on boards, but also in jobs. I think, you use a Mary Beard quote in the book, which I've written down and now can't find. I've been scrolling up and down through my notes looking for it and I can't find it.
I know it. It's the one from Women and Power. And she says you can't easily fit women into a system that is coded as male. You have to, start a new system or something like that. Yeah.
Because it's, aside from we've got one culture, which does prevail in a lot of places, you have then got we have the children are still the women's problem with the best will in the world. Not all men, but a lot. And, the meetings aren't necessarily when you can attend, are they? There's so many of those kind of things. Has that changed at all?
Not really. Not at the moment, it hasn't. Also, just to make things even worse, like, this is a football club that is the only club in the world to espouse equality. And even on that board, you've got more men named John than women at most of the board meetings that I was at, So, I mean, it's, mind you, to be fair, football is probably the malest of male bastions. I don't know what you would want to call it. And most people, at Lewes FC who apply to be on the board are fans of the men's game. Are fans of Lewes FC men, actually. So it's you might expect that to some degree. But yeah, I think it's very difficult, and it is a little microcosm of other boards across industry, really. There aren't many non-male bastions. So, but it really made me, new language, ways of sticking up for myself, ways of speaking. I had little phrases, in my diary and stuck onto my computer with Post-it notes that I could use to interrupt, or if I'd been interrupted to say, to use a phrase. And I tried not to take things personally, because the minute I did, everything would fail. Like, I just couldn't communicate anymore, because it's not just board meetings. You've got Slack channels.
Oh,
and
man.
A lot happens in a Slack. Yeah. A lot of exclusion can happen in a Slack channel. A lot of not replying can happen and not validating. And it really does take male allyship, or male agency, I call it, to champion the voices that aren't being heard. Because if you don't have that, it takes a special kind of person,
Yeah, I mean, I am really trying not to feel a bit despondent about this. I don't want the listeners to feel just...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, please don't. And I don't want the listeners to feel despondent about it, but I do feel it keeps coming back to the water. We aren't all aware of the water. We can't change the water.
Well, my lovely woman called Monique Chowdhury, that used to be on the board of Brentford FC, always said, they don't know what they don't know. And it's exactly that, isn't it, with the water? They don't know what they don't know. So you need a certain humility from, people with privilege, in this case, usually cis white male men over the age of 45. You need a certain amount of humility from them for them to listen, for them to allow other voices in to take the lead. And, and I think this could probably happen if people worked on it and had the time to work on it. But usually when you're running a football club, you're firefighting. There's so much to do, especially at a club like Lewes, where we use football as an engine for social change. You've got matches to put on, which are massive events. And then you've got campaigns to run as well. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, and that stuff like that is seen as like a nice to have, not an essential, isn't it?
Unfortunately, but for me, for someone like me that came to football via gender equality and not the other way round, it is actually an essential. I'm not interested in going to see women play football who are being paid a fraction of what the men's team is earning. I'm not interested in going to some rubbish match where they, pitch where they don't have food in the clubhouse and they don't have nice toilets and the women have to pick up poo off the pitch before they can play. I'm not interested in that. I want to go to nice surroundings and I want women to be valued properly or I won't pay my money. So for me, it is a priority, actually, EDI on a football club board. Otherwise, I won't give them my custom.
This episode is brought to you by Casamigos Tequila. What do you bring to a holiday party? Simple. A bottle of Casamigos. Because nothing gets the party started like a Casamigos margarita, which isn't just for summer. In fact, it's the perfect pour all year round. Casamigos is the gift that always feels right, because anything goes with my Casamigos. Please drink responsibly. Imported by Casamigos Spirits Company, White Plains, New York. Casamigos Tequila, 40% alcohol by volume.
You mentioned earlier menopause and the fact that, perimenopause and your football advocacy coincided and that menopause gave you permission to rage, basically, I suppose. I'm kind of slightly paraphrasing.
I think so.
I think one of the other things perimenopause and menopause do is kind of give you permission to say, oh, I am done putting up with your shit. Was there an element of that in your decision to step down?
I mean, there was, yes. There's a lot of things. So, in the book, one of my coping mechanisms was to invent a town called Fuckery, where I would send board members in my head.
We all need a town called Fuckery.
We really do. So on the board, I couldn't just shout sometimes or get really pissed off with people because it just isn't, you can't work like that. It's not respectful. So at home in my head, I would envision like people with jobs in Fuckery. So, the town crier would shout out only about men's football or the minutiae even of men's football and nothing about women's. And then there were people that would manage the hotel there that wouldn't turn up for meetings because, they didn't think they had to. Or, I would put my colleagues, unsuspecting colleagues, into these positions and it really helped me. I would really kind of like elaborate on it in my head as a way of getting to sleep at night. Because what happened at Lewes, I do think it's something to consider if you're thinking about introducing gender equality into industry in any way, is that what started as an equivalency, we pay the women the same as the men, became because the women were doing better than the men and the women's professional game was developing, they needed more than the men. So we needed to reach a position of equity. And equity was something that was very difficult for certain naysayers, usually a small amount of fans, to be fair, of the men's game, to accept. They can't get more than the men. So then what happens is the equality thing, though it worked amazingly in terms of attention and resources for the club, was starting not to work because they needed more and we didn't have full permission to do that. So then you need to reach, in my opinion, because I was then looking for investment for the women's team. And I'm actually still working on that, although I'm not on the board. I'm working on that very specific thing because you need to go to a stage where you get what I want to call emancipation. So you go from equality to equity through to emancipation, which is where you say, fuck it. I can't be dealing with this anymore. So I left the board, and you're quite right. You're, very insightful, Sam, having read the book. I don't actually say this in the book, but it's true. It was enough. I'm fed up of fighting for something that's right and should. So I think the only way to do it now is to separate the women's team from the men's. And by the way, the men's team is great. The men's team themselves are players. They're great role models, the managers and everything. And they can make their own money. and they can get up in the morning and bloody well say, we're going to do this today, without having a major consultation, steward's inquiry on whether it's fair or not, because you can't progress otherwise. So I think that, one reason I stepped down, I just thought this isn't really working.
Your book is like a microcosm of the age-old problem of, do I fight for a seat at the table? Do I fight for 2 seats at the table? Do I fight for 3 seats at the table? Or do I just fuck off and build my own table?
Build your own table. I mean, the thing is, I thought that I could. I mean, obviously all of this is collective effort, but I thought it would be all sunny and shiny in the garden of equality, and that we would really have this amazing thing. And in many ways we did, the sponsors we brought in, the owners, and that was all so brilliant. And it was such a ride. I mean, all the things that I got to do was absolutely brilliant. So you could never say it didn't work. But in terms of completing this narrative or allowing this narrative to fulfill its potential for the women, it's, fuck it. We just got to go and do it ourselves. Yeah. Much like the Lionesses did when they said football's coming home.
Yes.
And they brought it home finally. Yeah.
Do you think, obviously the Lionesses have had an enormous impact on the approach to, and I hate saying women's football, because it's like, why is men's football football and women's football women's football? But they have had such a massive, massive impact. Do you think that will lead to, I don't know what the word is, parity, equality in women's football and beyond Lewes in the bigger teams, or no, or just for a few?
Well, there's so many things to say there. First of all, I think we should say women's football and we should say men's football, not just football, because then we make the distinction. And also, I think, although they both play the same game, the meaning behind both of those games is so different because of the way that they've developed. And the DNA of women's football is all about social purpose and inclusion. Like the people that you get at the matches are so different to what you get at the men's game usually. So I think we should say men's football and women's football. And then in terms of what's the trajectory like? How's it going to go with the Lionesses doing so brilliantly? I think, I've been in Spain and in Germany talking about women's football. And I was quite surprised at how much both of those countries look up to England. We're obviously doing something right in terms of the FA and women's football. They're really looking at us to know how they should proceed. And that definitely the appetite is there to resource women more because of I guess they're seeing that they can make commercial returns from the game. Girls are playing more football. But then on the other hand, Sam, what with the sort of Trump effect and the kind of way that feminism really is going backwards sort of globally at the moment, it seems, I think women's football is a place that you want to put a little prick in that balloon if you're Trump, deflate all of our hopes and passions, because, they did it in 1921 when they banned women's football. And the reason they did it was they wanted women making babies again after the war, but also they wanted to stamp out lesbianism, which they felt threatened women making babies again after the war. And so I think it might be it could be a target, actually. So interesting one.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's funny you mention that, because I think that I hadn't been entirely clear that women's football was only banned in 1921. I don't think I understood that it had been, allowed and there and out there and successful. And then it was banned because it was, for the reasons you say, and because it was too successful. Just the same as women were pushed back into the home after the First World War and again after the Second World War. And I'm sure there are some listeners going, oh, here she goes. I just hadn't understood that was something that happened after the First World War, that it wasn't a forever thing, and I absolutely agree. I think we're in a time now where the dinosaurs are roaring,
Yeah, they really are. And I really see women's football as it's such a refreshing and wonderful thing to watch, even if you don't know the rules. It's just seeing women in those positions is so brilliant and so good for girls and women, because it's about leadership, actually. It teaches leadership lessons, because it's so powerful. It's so powerful and it's gaining power. I think that given the current sort of incel stuff and trad wife stuff and all of this that you see coming over from America, that there is a threat there. And I think, it's possible. But listen, let's not get too despondent, because I'm worried about your listeners as well at this point, because it is a fabulous thing. And we can we can go and watch women's matches. We can support, we can sponsor them. It doesn't, a lot of the small teams, it doesn't cost much at all. And tell people about them, because when you feel powerless about gender equality, really, maybe, gender pay gap or Me Too or all of these movements that we have, and you think there's nothing you can do, well, you can go and watch a women's football match, because you'll be supporting women who are going against the grain. And that is a great thing to do.
Yeah, and you'll be, to raise a point that you touched on earlier and a point that you make in the book, you'll be celebrating women who are doing something with their bodies, who are, who are not worrying about what they look like. It's what their bodies can do.
I'm just so concerned about younger women, as well. Partly, I've got a daughter and a son, but, I see them being sold collagen, and it's so important what they look like. And, my daughter's really intelligent. She's got a great job, and she's really concerned with, how much a tub of bloody whatever costs that she doesn't need. And it just pisses me off. And I really want to do whatever I can to change things for the next generation. I remember being concerned about stuff like that, but with social media, it's all so hyped up and it's so difficult. And so, yeah, I love this. And also going to a live women's football match, you make a community of friends as well, which has been brilliant for me too, chanting with what we call the firm, ironically, as my friend, and making up chants for the women players, like making up chants about their names. It just feels fab, every aspect of it.
That's brilliant. I'm going to ask you the questions that I always ask at the end now. What is your emotional age?
Yes, well, I think it's the age I am, really. I mean, I'm quite young-minded, so, I get on with children very well. It's a bit worrying sometimes. Let's go for young then. Let's say, 14 or something like that.
Give us a book recommendation. So it can be something great that you read lately, or it can be something that's really been significant to you since childhood. It can be anything.
Well, I was thinking of the last book I read, which I've got here, which I really enjoyed. It's called Girl on Girl, and it's by Sophie Gilbert, who is a staff writer for The Atlantic. And it's really interesting because it's about, I don't know how we've been taught to objectify ourselves and think it's fun or ironic when it isn't, because of the society that we live in. We forget that we don't have the power. So I think it's a great book because it really makes the case about how that happened, and it goes through pop culture, from Spice Girls to Lena Dunham and all these people, and porn comes up a lot, which is interesting. So yeah, it's a really good book. I enjoyed it. Satisfying.
Yeah, I've got that, but I haven't read it. So I'm thinking I'm going to go and drag it out of the pile when we get off. What advice would you give younger women?
So I've, had lots of therapy in the past when I was quite young, and in my 20s especially. I feel it's been so useful to me to know myself, because if you really know yourself, you can choose which parts of yourself to put into a meeting or into a relationship. So I think I would say to younger women, really try to really know yourself, accept and know yourself, because different parts of you might be useful in different contexts.
I think that's useful for older women too. This one, certainly. I'm going to cheat now, and I'm just going to ask you a question that I'd actually noted down earlier and we didn't cover it. But tell us about the locus of evaluation, because I think, I know that's a counselling thing, but I think women are so bad at that.
Yes, I agree. So with my counselling training, I learned that people basically all have a locus of evaluation, and that's the way you judge yourself in your mind's eye. So it can be, the more internal it is, the more psychologically healthy you might feel. When that locus is external and it's based on other people's opinions of you, then you're not very resilient and you're quite fragile, really, psychologically. But if you can judge yourself from your own perspective, and you have an internal locus, then it's really, really great, And quite often that what we call conditions of worth are at work here. So if you can, in the relationship with a therapist, if you can feel very accepted, like unconditionally accepted for who you are, you learn to have less and less conditions of worth upon yourself. And then your locus can move from external towards internal. And it's not, it's not a deal ever, I don't think. I think people's locuses move around. The more you can experience yourself in a non-judgmental way, the more internalized your locus will be, and the happier you'll be, really, and the more willing to give yourself, I think, without hindering yourself.
That's so interesting. Who's your old bird role model?
I really like Grace Jones. I know she's not that old, but I always love her aura and her persona and the way she just goes for it. I think she's funny as well. So I might say her.
What's your superpower?
I'm sort of very open, but also willing to ask for anything. As if you read Bitch Invasion, you'll know. And so I think I'm going to say cheek.
Oh, yes.
Cheek.
I'm jealous.
I think the thing is, like, I have to think to myself that I have to sort of think I'm doing it for this reason, like get my mission really clear, and then I can do anything.
Right, last one. How many fucks do you give?
Yeah, well, I actually give quite a lot of fucks about quite a lot of things, actually. I know I say fuck it quite a lot, but that's because I've fed up with giving fucks. But I start off by giving a lot. So I'm going to say that I give quite a lot of fucks.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.